Right. Okay. Well, here we are again talking about the sea for the second time, and maybe even more sea discussion will happen. But I wanted to start, seeing as you did this when we launched last week, with a question for you, which is, how much do you remember of the first time that you encountered the sea?
Struggling here.
Mm.
I think it must have been. We used to go on sort of. It must have been the weekend, I'm sure, to Prestatyn and Rhyl.
Yeah, yeah, North Wales, right?
Yeah, so it's because we grew up near sort of. It's sort of nearer Chester, Manchester, but so that coast was actually quite close. But I also really remember Southwold in
Oh,
Suffolk.
right. Yeah, yeah,
Because we used to go there. I didn't. It might have been every year for a while because some friends had a house. I think we walked past it after all tomorrow's parties. Do you remember?
yeah. I do.
We went. We went for fish and chips, and there's a pier. And I think as soon as you said it, all I can remember is I had measles, and my mum said it was a good idea to go in the sea. It
Yeah,
kind of had a healing quality, salty water and all that. I think it's probably North Wales would have been the first. It's just like beach, sand, toddling about. It was as presumed had picnics and things like that.
yeah,
But I didn't. Don't. I think I was really little. I think there might even be photographs on the beach. But I think once there was the difference between going to the beach because it was like beach holiday. So in England, that's like bucket and spade, towels, picnic, and you'd go in the sea. And then walks on the beach, which were different altogether.
mm.
Because we've always had a dog in the family. So you go
Yeah.
to the beach to take the dog for a walk. Um, so you won't. But then I think there must have been a point when I learnt to swim. I think I've got a photograph of me with, them bright orange armbands that we used to wear.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
And I think I remember, because we learnt to swim, my mum did with me and my sister. Really young, we learnt to swim. So, but I do remember the difference between going to the swimming pool and going in the sea.
Yeah.
The sea was scarier when I was little.
Right. Yeah. I remember the same
Yeah,
thing, but I also was struck by how, because saline water is denser than
yeah,
non-saline water or chlorine water in a swimming pool, that you just have that kind of little bit of help because the sea's
yeah,
heavy compared with the swimming pool or a lake for that matter. And
yeah,
I
yeah,
quite like that you could lie on your back. If there weren't loads of waves, you can just lie on your back, and if you inflate your lungs, you can just float, and that's is quite a sublime experience. I do remember from some, I can't remember where or when, but from some holiday when I was a kid, lying on my back and looking at the sky and thinking, I'm not sinking and I'm not making any effort. So this is kind of a special. It's like a kind of almost. I mean, you are floating effortlessly. There's not many times in your life where you can just drift and float,
no,
making
no. And
no
now,
effort whatsoever.
now I'm also remembering we went to the Isle of Man. I must have been really young because my dad wanted to go and watch the TT motorbike racing. But
Yeah.
it sort of coincided with a holiday. We took the ferry from, I think, Liverpool. Um, and I remember going in the sea, and seaweed was an issue.
Right.
And then I got stung by
Too
a
much seaweed.
jellyfish.
Oh right, yeah,
It just was a bit spooky.
it is scary. Yeah, seaweed is yeah. It gets you don't trust it, do you?
Not really, but I got stung between my legs by a jellyfish.
Nasty.
And I think that had some impact on the idea of this going in the sea from there. I don't mind now at all.
You're okay now. Well, I know that because my memory of Suffolk is after the festival, you ran into the sea and were swimming about in the sea.
That's
So
right.
yeah, clearly you're not sea phobic.
No, we have with Grace. We've always had this thing about if there's water, you should go in.
Yeah,
But I'm a bit more, probably a bit more Nash now.
yeah,
So you
yeah.
never really chuck it below.
I'm trying to de-nesh. I've always been quite nesh when it comes to the sea, but yeah, trying to be less so.
Yeah, you can't get a wetsuit. You can't go down that road.
No, well, yeah, it's just a nice way of. I mean, it's intrinsically rewarding to jump into a cold sea, but I mean, as soon as you do it, you don't regret it. You just kind of have this regret, anticipation of regret as you go in. But it is a peculiar. The moment when you jump into the sea or dive forward into the sea, it is a fucking weird, immense feeling. I mean, I know some people open swim and they seem to have accustomed themselves to it. But yeah, as far as I'm concerned, every time I do it, it's a moment, and then
I suspect
you feel
everybody
pleased with
because
yourself.
your body has
Hmm?
a shock, doesn't it? It's like that.
Yeah,
Your body has a shock. I don't
yeah,
think you'd ever get used to that. But mentally, you might learn to look forward to it or something. But
you can. Yeah, I mean, there's a remarkable story of a woman. I think it will be in the kind of mid 1980s, a woman who swam from Alaska to whatever the bit of the what was then Soviet Union. Um, well, because Alaska and the Soviet Union are really close, we have a map that kind of makes it look like America and Russia have got Europe between them, which is completely misleading. And because she was some sort of hopeful American liberal, and Gorbachev got to power, and she thought in order to make a gesture of siblinghood between the American people and the Russian people, she would swim. She would swim. What sea would that be? I don't know. You probably know the North better. The strait between Alaska and whatever is on the other side in the Soviet Union, and she swam it. I think it took. This is all from a vague memory, but I think she was in the sea, a sea that was below freezing because salt water freezes below, right, freezing, for about 2 hours. And she'd obviously had to train for that, and there was a boat with her and checking her heart and all this kind of thing. But yeah, I dip into Whitstable Sea and I go out for about 5 minutes, and then I come back and I have a big, warm, fluffy cloak thing that I put on, and I feel very pleased with myself. But really, Graham, grow up. It's really not that big a deal.
no, I think I said last week. No, I'm jealous of that.
Hmm.
Definitely.
Yeah, it's
So
good.
one thing that I think uh, I think when I started last week with the question about the sea, and you said it's very difficult not to end up sounding like a romantic poet or something when you try and describe or write or work or do something with the sea. What do you mean?
Yeah, good question. Because I did think about that afterwards, and when I watched it back, I kind of I don't think I was quite right about that. I think the reason I started with that was because your question, how are you finding the sea? The response is it is quite difficult to respond to that question immediately without sort of talking about the majesty of the sea or the whispering of the waves, or the moods of the sea, and all of these things. And they are really well trodden, those devices, those literary devices. So it was an observation that I think I pitched at too generic a level. I think there is a risk. I think there is a risk of becoming cliche. I work in a personal way. I'm trying, as you know, I'm trying to write, and one of the ways of keeping fit as a writer is to try and write as you move through the world. So I've been trying to write short pieces of verse about the sea, and usually I would have to delete them quite quickly because it just seemed constantly impossible to say anything that didn't sound really toe-clenchingly over familiar or full of sort of stupid stuff about the horizon, or it is quite difficult.
I mean,
To try and say something about the sea. But the other thing I noticed about it, because I was thinking that's not right, Graham, or at least it's not the full picture. The other thing I noticed, and I've been kind of trying to focus my reading on the sea over the last week, which isn't the same thing and is maybe more productive, maybe more positive, is that you can say anything about the sea. So, for example, I was looking at some bits of fiction that were writing about the sea and just looking at colour. And I would like to claim that if you are a published author and you need to describe the sea, you can use any colour and it works. Right? You can talk about it as being purple, you can talk about it as being red, green, blue, black. You can use any colour. So and I think you could use any kind of adjective, right? Or use any mood as a metaphor for the sea. The sea can be forgiving, it can be angry, it can be devious. So you can say, in a sense, I think the sea is remarkably permissive. If it's cliched, then it also allows it allows anyone who's got any intention in writing something serious to almost describe anything.
yeah, I
Which I
think
think is nicer. It's a nicer way of thinking about it because it's a little bit more open, and then it gives, rather than everyone wanting to say something original, you can just say whatever you want, and it's fine.
yeah, because I sort of how do you feel about the sea was like, well, it feels great, you know, it's brilliant walking down there every day. I think that's the
Yeah,
bit that
agreed.
because it's phenomena in that sense, and you witness and you're part of the phenomena happening in a way. Because afterwards I was thinking it is you talked about this idea it's in motion, and yeah, that's the big thing, isn't it? It's like you're never static in relation to it, which is phenomenal. Yeah, which is part of its characteristic, isn't it? I think the other side of the question was, and this is the bit I'm really interested in. I agree that the cliche, and we talked a bit about, but that comes from somewhere. I think at the moment, the tourist industry is a huge part of that, but also particularly in the UK, we've got this phenomenal literary and artistic tradition and music from the Romantic period. The big shift from the land to the city, that the sea as this untamable metaphor became extraordinary. And I wonder, in saying, oh, but it all sounds romantic, whether that's, we're putting an unnecessary obstacle in it, in the works, because those issues, that's why I feel so relevant again. And just before you click record, what you told me was that the glitches in the recording, AI fills in for us.
Yeah,
And it's just that idea of, again, the unedited raw image or experience is increasingly getting filtered experience is filtered now through, it's not always, but I'm talking again in a lot of instances through some sort of digital encounter that's, fiddled about with. And the politics of that, not at all. I know enough to know enough about parts of it, but I don't know the bigger issues in it. But the basic thing is that the way in which, again, really simply, your lived experience is increasingly getting redefined into these very particular types of, for me, images, but also words. Because the algorithm can only go on what's already there. It can't just randomly invent something. So you're constantly overlaying on top of itself. And recently I've encountered that through a number of things where you, in images, but also in text, where you, hang on a minute, surely I've seen that. And sure enough, it's there. And I know enough reading, and again, visually, the sort of visual histories that I inherited, but I'm really interested in. That idea of, I think mistakenly, we look at, the idea of the romantic standing alone, staring into the void of the mountain or the sea. I think that's the myth. I think what was way more active was this attempt to find the right steps as you move forward with it. And yes, some of that's quite apocalyptic, because the notion of the industrial revolution and the mechanical reproduction of everything, which has now become something completely different. I think those issues, and we tend to use, it's, the romanticism as a sort of very negative, potentially very negative thing, and far from it, I think. The cliches is something worth examining, I think, where they've come from.
Yeah, I think the romantic, I mean, a lot of these things are big fluffy cushions, aren't they, that get thrown about. But so we take something like the romantic tradition, which is largely pre-Victorian, or just about touches on the edge of the Victorian period. I think that there is I would say, in my amateurish way, that the romantic tradition is one that is about unmediated experiences. It is all about the encounter. It's about something that looks immediate and intuitive and unscientific, right? The romantic reaction of romantics to the Industrial Revolution was to lament the machine, not just because it was modern or whatever, but because it kind of created alienation. So I think romantic tradition, the thing I think about with that, and I think it roughly correlates, is one of the first proper, so it's a book on political theory, so I'm not going to go into this very much, because frankly I don't think any one of our listeners would be very interested, but Edmund Burke.
Graham.
Right, okay. Well, Edmund Burke, he wrote a book called On Beauty. Edmund Burke, famous conservative intellectual, member of Parliament, wrote very strongly worded responses to the French Revolution. So writing in the late 1700s, he wrote a book called On Beauty, and he focuses on all sorts of things. Like, he talks about how beauty should be symmetrical, which is obviously silly, but he also talks about the notion of the sublime. And he has an interesting way of talking about the sublime, which is that it is intrinsically terrifying. And I think when I read Burke, I kind of thought of Turner. And who is again on this cusp, right? Everyone gets edgy when there's a change in century, right? So the late 1700s, you can see all these intellectuals getting edgy, and it happens every time a century passes. So Turner, who obviously wrote, his seascapes move from very studied, particularly when he did watercolors, they're rubbish. He can't paint the sea at all. I was at the exhibition last week, and they have some of his notepads with the ink and the watercolor paintings, and they're really he'll do rocks and he'll do buildings, but his sea, his ability to do the water was shite. And then he obviously works that out and does these incredible seascapes that become so huge. And then he kind of, in my view, he sort of gives up trying to do that at all, and he just starts attacking the canvas and doing these very highly, I would say, abstract paintings of the sea. And I think that's what he's trying to engage with. I don't know anything about Turner, but I will say, with no authority whatsoever, that the seas that he's painting in his final 10 years are sublime seas. They're terrifying. They're unfathomable. They don't really obey any of the laws of nature. There's huge arcs of what might be sea or might be sky or might be smoke, and then you can see in the paintings that they look like they've been painted violently, with a certain kind of release.
It's interesting that I think they're painted with a lot of energy. I know that. Whether that equates to being violent, I'm not sure. But I think again, it's because if you start moving away from obvious description, like you were describing, trying to write something, then you begin to I think it's easier to open up a more uncertain set of relationships with a seascape than it is with a human being. Because to use that woolly term, the abstraction of it, of a human being, I mean, you can push that a long way, I know, like a description. You're not sure if they're talking about, you're writing about a tree or a human, there might be a blurry there. But there is something, whereas the light, the sky, the sea, I mean, it's so super open, isn't it, in that sense? And I think for Turner, it was like the perfect balance point between something about atmosphere and embodied phenomena, which you can't do with a tree in the same way, or a human being, or a building.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, and you could see it in the exhibition. It was quite. I felt sorry for John Constable because the exhibition is the two of them,
He's also really
and he's drawing all of these really well figured kind of bucolic, romantic peasant types. Forking hay into the back of carts, and women, kind of driving.
Realism of its day.
Yeah, there's a realism to it, but in terms of the composition of the pictures, they're rich with people, and they're rich with well figured bits and pieces of what he painted as rural life, which is romantic, bearing in mind the times in which he was painting, and everyone in the point being that although these Constable paintings are incredible, everyone was moving past them more briskly than they were with the Turners, and I'm sure that's partly because Mike Leigh did the Turner film, and everyone knows him, and he's more charismatic and had this interesting double life and all this business. But people didn't really.
They've got this openness, which a tree is a tree, and you can say, oh, it's a tree. Whereas with Turner, there's this liquid looseness that I think draws a very different sort of attention. And because it's probably titled, Whitstable, stormy day. That's probably all you need to.
Did you know that Turner has, in art history terms anyway, Turner has the longest name for a painting? And don't ask me what it is because I don't know. But if you Google it, you will find it. It's the longest name for a single piece of displayed work in the history of art.
I find that hard to believe, but fair enough.
Yeah.
Okay.
To prove me.
All right, I'll go away and Google that after. So it was this idea that there's, on the most simple level, how does it feel? And then I agree with you, getting caught immediately into cliche, for using the term cliche, and there's a sort of sentimentality which I think is Victorian to do with that. Prior to that, the sea was industry, it was just hard work and graft, wasn't it? And people didn't go to the seaside to paddle. So I was thinking about, because I spent a lot of time studying and I've worked in Nottingham. When I first moved to Nottingham, there was this weird thing in the certain months where Nottingham just evacuated to the seaside, which was all linked to, the textile industry and the coal industry.
Right.
So you'd have the East Coast were just these temporary communities that at some point had thousands of people in them. And you think, why didn't they go to the seaside? Why didn't they go to, I don't know, some countryside or something? Clearly, is this an English phenomena? Is it a European phenomena? The idea of going to the seaside, and is that to do with health? Maybe the sea air is meant to be good for you. That's quite an old tradition, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that goes way back, to Roman, Greek. We're off. So fishermen. Wonder where they used to go. On holiday. They didn't go and paddle in the sea, did they? So, but I was thinking about, and that coincided again with this period around the Industrial Revolution, where leisure, the worker had a holiday, you had a week or 2 weeks blocked out, and the seaside became the place. And then these towns like Blackpool and Margate, and we're off, hundreds of them.
Yeah, I mean, there's a quite strong class history to all of that, I think, because the Industrial Revolution destroyed people's leisure time. You were better off being a farmer than a worker for a good 150 years. Capital jealously allowed you half a day a week for the purposes of being a good Christian, and then would put you to work for the rest of the time from the break of dawn until sunset. So it took a while for capital to allow its workers leisure time, and even then it would be a kind of weekend break. And so all during that time, the seaside resorts, and this is the history of pretty much all of the historic seaside towns, particularly actually Margate and Brighton, and one or two others on that. You can almost pick them off. That broader satellite of London, the places that were just being connected to railways, those were all for the middle classes or the bourgeoisie. They all went there for their health breaks, right? If you weren't, I mean, Bath is the only other place that fits this picture, but all these seaside resorts were health places where people went to have their their martinis whilst looking at the sea, and then going into the sea, and then coming back, and then reading a bit of Dickens, and then playing a bit of bridge. This kind of image, and that really doesn't. What happens when working classes win reasonable, decent amount of holiday time, the emergence of popular leisure takes place, and you get this second wave of seaside town architecture and activities, which are reflected in other places like Clacton or Blackpool, where you
Yeah, I
get
was thinking
ordinary
Open
people
Skate.
going to the seaside for fun, and that is the buckets and spades and ice cream holidays that you've talked about, and I also experienced at Lyme Regis, which was a posh Victorian resort initially in Devon. So yeah, I mean, there's a story in that, and I think it is a very English story. I say English, not British. That is to do with the Industrial Revolution, and is to do with class dynamics, and is to do with a certain kind of tradition. I wondered about the same thing you were wondering about, which is how much is this a story about England or Britain? And I think it might be quite a distinctive part of a national cultural history, that the seaside is where you go on holiday, and the idea of the seaside. I am afraid to say I do have running around right at the back of my head. Oh, I do like to be beside the seaside, because it is almost like the national anthem.
Yeah.
And I don't know if France or, well, unlikely Germany doesn't have much coastline, but I wonder if any other countries have a similarly
Yeah,
familiar ditty about the sea.
yeah, northern France, in Normandy, I think coincided. There was a similar thing of holidaying in that way.
Hmm.
And, I mean, the climate maybe as well. Countries where, have a clearly different climate, it's not a thing, is it? You know. Interesting. That's opened up something else. Maybe for another time. But because I did think, there is something, don't know how to say, it's not unique at all, but there is something different a bit, I think, perhaps about our fair islands relationship, being surrounded by water in that sense. But I think that is partly to do with the climate.
Yeah.
Because if, and then absolutely what you said about, it's to do with class, and it's to do with shifting patterns of labour and wealth and leisure time. Because I got 2 summers ago, I got E. coli from the sea. And the reason I know I got E. coli was because I went on a surfing website that did all the coasts of the UK, and they tell you if there's been outbreaks. And there had been an outbreak nearer towards Sunderland, so it was quite likely, because there'd been a heavy rainfall, the rivers had flooded and washed a lot of more shit into the sea. So I got E.
Right.
coli.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, it's still possible for water companies to put raw sewage into the sea, which I kind of, when sometimes, even though everyone is so sufficiently depressed that it's difficult to depress people anymore. Yeah, private companies still discharging untreated sewage into the sea. It's
and it's got worse, isn't it?
beyond. It is beyond words.
Yeah.
And it's a real problem here in Whitstable. Southeast Water, who are currently on the verge of being uh, is subject to some sort of rescue package by the government, intervention by the government, are still discharging raw sewage into the sea. That's yeah,
Apparently, though,
nationalise the
lobsters,
fuckers.
lobsters do really well out of that. Lobsters gravitate towards the shit pipes.
Yeah, well, it's a canteen for them,
Anthony
isn't
Bourdain. Yeah, Anthony Bourdain. It's like instant takeaway.
it?
Because
Great
I mean,
cycle of life.
oh, there you go. We've got, I think, about 5 minutes, because the other bit that struck me, um, thinking about what we've been talking about last week and even now this week, is the huge psychological thing about the horizon. which it's the one time I think I can't think of any other occasions where you're so aware of the horizon and psychologically how that locates you somewhere. And I think when you first asked me what was my first experience of the sea, it was something about that, though I had no language to. I was suddenly aware that you could, wow, what the fuck? You know, what's. Or somebody would say, oh, France is over there, and you go, what? That's not possible.
Yeah.
So it's this, but it's also being generally, I'm an upright human being. You suddenly, it's this psychological thing, of being upright, looking at something like that. And I think probably as a kid, having this thing, what happens when you go over the edge?
Yeah, quite.
Yeah, classic. Oh God, what's it called? That film, Truman Show.
All right. Yes. Yes. Yes.
At the end, he bumps into the edge of the world with his boat.
Yeah.
And there's something about the horizon, which, I mean, again, metaphorically, there is the whole losing the horizon and looking beyond the horizon and everything. It's a thread in so much culture, isn't it? This turning the world upside down and and the classic image straight away that always comes to mind when you talk about romanticism is the idea of looking out across into something that gets really badly confused with the notion of sublime beauty and everything, because I agree, sublime in both religious sense and non-religious, it's a shock to the system. It's a jolt where the relationship between things just go whack and out of sync.
Yeah, yeah.
And the little I know about certain religions, it's a really heightened state of the sublime is an absolute aspirational thing because you lose sense of self and body and so staring at the horizon, you must do that every day.
I do. Yeah, yeah. I see the horizon every day. It's not an unencumbered one. I mean, we don't have time, but I was wanting to talk because I was going to suggest we haven't really talked about the sea at all yet. We've talked about the coastline. And one of the things that is very, very prevalent in writing about the sea is what it's like to be, well, to use a phrase, total sea. So what it's like to not know where one is, not to see any land at all. That's what I'm trying to say. And the experience that in that's a quite powerful experience, and I've not had it. I mean, I've been out on a few boats, but there's always been some land in view. And I guess what I was just about to say about Whitstable is there's a horizon there, and it's the sea, the North Sea, but it's also got regular passages of container ships going in and out of the Thames, and it's also got some very fascinating constructions from the Second World War, which are kind of like big. Well, they look like mini oil derricks that were initially designed to have guns mounted on them to defend the coastline. And then there's a great big load of windmills, not hydroelectric, but electric windmills. So the horizon itself is there, but it's actually, because of the place where we live, it's a horizon with a lot of busyness.
No, as soon as you said it, we haven't talked about the sea. We've talked about a very anthropocentric idea of the sea, haven't we?
Well, inevitably so, yeah. I'm still struggling to find out how one doesn't take an anthropocentric view. I know it's very fashionable to talk about anthropocentrism, but what do you do? Squeak like a dolphin?
next week you're coming dressed as a lobster. I'll come
Okay.
as.
I'd rather not be a lobster, bearing in mind we just talked about how much shit they guzzle.
Shitting.
Can I not be something a bit more? I'm going to be. I'm going to be
Jellyfish.
I'm going to be a cuttlefish. They're my favourite marine animal. Cuttlefishes. Yeah, I'm going to come as a
Yeah.
cuttlefish.
Good.
What are you coming as?
Well, on that note, I think on
A
that
what?
note,
A what?
on that note, we'll say
What
see
you're
you
going
next
to be?
week.
Okay. Chin chin. Fella out.